Hello, it's Mark here from Yoko Bear Reads. I'm going to do my first ever BookTube book haul video because, as usual, I've been buying books probably more than I should. Hey, but there's no such thing as too many books, is there? So I've got about 10 to get through, so I'm going to go at quite a pace, I think, because I've got a lot to get through. Let's start with the crime novels. I'm going to start with one of my favourite authors, Oscar de Muriel's The Lock of the Dead. This is the fourth book in the series, the Frey and McGray series, about two detectives who are very mismatched. It's set in Victorian times, has a real supernatural edge to it as well, quite creepy in a very satisfying way. These two detectives are very mismatched. One is a hard-bitten Glaswegian, the other is what can only be described as a bit of a Victorian dandy fop. And there's quite a lot of the interaction between them is brilliant, as what I guess we would call banter. There's lots of banter between them. Incredibly well written, really exciting. I've raced through the first three books. So very much looking forward to this. A good, proper Victorian crime with a bit of a spooky edge to it. The next author I don't really know much about. I picked this up on a whim. Edmund Crispin's The Glimpses of the Moon. It's a very kind of golden age feel crime novel. Though it was published in 1977, it does apparently have a real feel of a 1930s crime novel, set in a little village in Devon in England, and a decapitated head is found in the river, and that's where the trouble starts. It's meant to be very, very funny. There's a thing on the back from P.D. James saying absolutely marvellous comic sense in this book. So I do like a bit of a kind of black comedy, golden age crime novel. So very interested to find out about this and more about this author perhaps. See whether he's written any more as well. Now, the next crime one. Well, I don't know whether it's crime. I'm counting it under my kind of crime haul because of the author. And it's Agatha Christie. Anti-Agatha. I've got some Agatha. But this is my book haul book of the month. There it is. Looks terrible, doesn't it? Look at that stain. Looks like hammer and sickle, doesn't it? Anyway, it's in a bit of a battered state. It's quite old. Look, it's all, it's the colour's a bit bad. But here's what it is. The Hound of Death and Other Stories by Agatha Christie. Now, Agatha Christie was better known for her crime novels and crime short stories, but occasionally she would write ghost stories and supernatural tales. I've heard about them, but I've never read any of them. But that is this collection. So when I saw this in a second-hand shop for the mere sum of £3 I had to have this. But it got even better because when I got it home, I opened up the front cover and it turns out this is a 1933 first edition. So £3 for a first edition, even though it is a bit battered. But I love a good ghost story. I love a good supernatural short story. And I think Agatha Christie can really, really write. So very, very much looking forward to this. I did buy another fiction book in the last week or so, which is the recently published Edward Louis' History of Violence. I don't know whether you call it a follow-up to The End of Eddie. I don't know. It's a similar thing, which is it's all fiction, but based very, very much on the author's life. I absolutely love The End of Eddie. I thought it was a very difficult read at times. It was very harsh to read, and apparently this is not much different. But also as well, I found it a very satisfying read, and I'm hoping to get the same from this. I'm hoping to be challenged. I'm hoping it's going to make me think. I don't know much about this, and I've deliberately not found out much about this because I want to go in this completely without really knowing. But what I do know, it's about a very violent incident and the aftermath of that. That's all I know. So looking forward to this, but with a bit of trepidation as well, I think, because like I said, The End of Eddie was quite a difficult read. But I don't think we should shy away from difficult reads and novels about difficult subjects. I think it's important that these things are explored through fiction, or, you know, maybe kind of semi-fiction, I guess you would call this. History next. I've bought a couple of history books. First one is Toby Wilkinson's The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt. Now, I've read a lot about certain Egyptian things. I've read loads about Tutankhamun's tomb and stuff like that, and how they found that. But I realised I don't really know much deeper kind of Egyptian history, the stuff that isn't the populist stuff. And this got recommended to me as, if you want a really good overview of the whole of Egyptian civilization from prehistory right up to Cleopatra, then this is your book. It's quite a tome, it's quite thick, but then again, the Egyptian Empire was around for quite a while, wasn't it? So there's a lot to cover. Very much looking forward to this. I love history. I've got a real interest in history, but I really don't read enough of it. And I've been making an effort to try and pick up more history, but not just from one specific era, but pick up lots of stuff from different eras and just find out a bit more about everything. And so Egypt's where I'm going next. So very much looking forward to this. I also got another history book, which is, if you love a bit of Downton Abbey, I think this will be right up your street. The Long Weekend by Adrian Tinniswood. Life in the English country house between the wars. I do love a bit of Downton Abbey. I love a bit of Brideshead Revisited. And I do love that kind of interwar period. I think because of my love of things like Agatha Christie, very much a lot of her stuff set in that interwar period in the UK between the First World War and the Second World War. I'm also really interested in the whole concept of class through the 20th century in Britain. And this obviously comes into it because whenever you think about country houses, it's always going to be a story of two halves, isn't it? You're going to have the nobility and the aristocracy, but you're also going to have the servants, the working class people, who are also living in the house and working in the house. This is, from all accounts, an absolutely superb social history about the people, about some of the stories around this, looking at some of the more famous houses, but also about the kind of time that that we were in, that kind of what felt like, I guess, like a long extended summer before the rise of the Nazis and the Second World War. Also as well, there's loads in here about the architecture, the architects, and also about the kind of, you know, the furnishing and the fashions and stuff like that. There's so many, and I'll show you, there's so many kind of illustrations like that, that I think, you know, there's lots of artwork, and it's all about the art of country houses as well. So I think this is going to be an absolutely superb read. It's a read that I think it's called The Long Weekend. I think it is a read for a weekend, you know, to spend a Sunday afternoon reading something like this. This is exactly what I like to do on a Sundays. So yeah, very much look forward to that one as well. Now the next one has got a bit of an odd story to it because I wasn't going to buy this. It's another non-fiction one, and it is Kirk Wallace Johnson's The Feather Thief. Beauty, Obsession and the Natural History Heist of the Century. It's essentially, it starts off with the story of a crime, which is a guy that stole loads of feathers and bird skins from one of Britain's natural history museums, with the view to kind of sell them to the people who are really into fly fishing. You know, they make those little hook things with the feathers on to fool the fish that think it's flies and different kinds of insects. But it apparently, and I found out about this on the radio, I heard something about this, and it's much more than that. It's about the Victorian obsession with these feathers and fly fishing and the market for these feathers. It's also about the crime itself, but it's also about the kind of whole art and industry of people making these flies. So yeah, it's not something I would normally be interested in, but sometimes I think the book gods and goddesses send you a message. And that's when I was flicking through this in the bookstore, um, thinking about should I buy this, should I not? I was erring on not until I flicked over a page and I saw a name, and it's quite an unusual name. And I suddenly realised that that name was somebody that I knew personally, and it's basically a guy that I used to share a house with, and I knew he was really into fly fishing and stuff like that. But he was somebody who was conned by this thief, and there's kind of a big mention of him in there. So I thought, you know what, I've been sent a message here. I should buy this book because there's kind of a connection between me through this guy to what happened in this book. So yeah, I think when the book gods and goddesses send you a message like that, you heed it. So I bought it. The other thing that I've bought, I bought a lot of non-fiction this month. Maybe it is a little bit unusual actually. Normally I buy more fiction, but there's been quite a good lot of non-fiction around. One that I've just started, and I'm about 3 chapters in, and I'm loving it so far, is The Crossway by Guy Stagg. This is a story about a Guy Stagg, who had a nervous breakdown, and as he was recovering, decided he was going to do something, which was walk on foot from Canterbury in the UK to Jerusalem. And he did it. He walked the whole way. And this is the story of it. So I guess from what I've picked up in the first 3 chapters, it's a story about kind of recovery from mental health issues. It's a travelogue. It's also kind of about religion. And now the author isn't very religious from what I can gather. But obviously he's following a kind of old pilgrimage path, a pilgrim's way from Canterbury down through Rome to Jerusalem. So there's lots of stuff in there about the kind of church as it is now, and about pilgrimage and the history of pilgrimage and within the church and stuff like that. And I'm not particularly religious myself, but I'm kind of interested in the whole concept of pilgrimage, why people do it. Somebody I know is doing the Camino de Santiago next year. And again, I'm quite fascinated by that. So when I saw this was about a pilgrimage and a travelogue about it, I thought, you know, I'm going to read it. And I've not been disappointed. The writing is brilliant. There's a real melancholic power behind, you know, the writing that I've read so far in this. So very much looking forward to finishing this. And finally, 2 books. Well, kind of 1 book with 2 books, or 2 volumes. Now, as you know, and I've said before, I like to get a ghost story in. And my ghost story homeboy, you know, my main man, God, I'm in my 50s and I just said homeboy. It's a bit embarrassing really, isn't it? I said main man as well. Ooh. Anyway, my ghost story main man is M.R. James, Montague Rhodes James. I mentioned before, his short stories literally wrote the book on ghost stories. Absolutely, I'm obsessed with him. I think, I love his stuff. Well, you can get them in graphic novel form now. How brilliant is this? Adapted by Liam Moore and John Reppion. There's 2 volumes so far, and I think the plan is to do a graphic story for all of the ghost stories that were in M.R. James's first ever anthology, which was Ghost Stories for an Antiquary. And there he is there. That's my main man, M.R. James. Now, they're absolutely beautiful. There's a lot of artists involved with this. There's a lot of different, I think they've used different graphic artists for different stories. They're absolutely so well drawn. They're scary. Just because it's in graphic novel form doesn't mean that it's scary. If anybody's actually read the graphic novel Witches, you know that graphic novels can be really scary. So yeah, this is absolutely brilliant. Also as well, I think that anything that gets people reading M.R. James is great in my book. And if it takes a graphic novel, that's brilliant. But what I really hope is people who read the graphic novels then go out and buy the actual short stories, because they're really worth it. But this has been brilliant. I've already read the first volume in about 2 hours, and I will be going to bed with this tonight. Really, yeah, bit of a ghost story for bedtime. So that's my book haul. I'm not sure what my next video is going to be about. Probably a review, I think, maybe. I don't know. I'm just kind of making this up as I go along. Also, as well, a friend of mine is going to show me how to edit. Woohoo! So you won't get this ad hoc stuff, hopefully, in future. And maybe I can take out some of my ums. So yeah, basically, that's my book haul video. I think it's quite good. This is kind of what my book hauls are normally about. A bit of non-fiction, a bit of history, a bit of crime, a bit of supernatural. I do try and vary what I buy, and often I kind of buy something on the fly just to see whether I like it. So, but anyway, but that is my book haul. So thank you very much, and I'll be back soon. Oh yes, and if you like this, please subscribe and click that little bell thingy as well, and click likes. Oh, you know what to do. Okay then, bye.